what usually happens in these discussions, Kevin, we go to the most ridiculous example, is what if somebody breaks in my front door, they're coming in to attack my family, what am I going to do? Well, here's what I would have people to do. Be prepared for that. If you want to go to the ridiculous example, prayerfully consider, what would your response be? Be ready. My response would be not to defend myself or my family, not to attempt to be offensive in my actions towards someone. I will lock my doors. I will call the police. I will jump in front of a bullet that's headed towards my children, or whatever you want to try to make the example. But I cannot play God and decide the man walking in that door's life is less valuable than the life of my child. I know that's not a popular stance, but when I start defending myself unto wanting to take life or maim life because they deserve it, I am now putting myself in the position of God. If you own a gun that you keep at your bedside, a pistol, to protect your family, what do you intend to do with that? Mm-hmm. So you have premeditated murder. If you own a gun that you keep at your bedside, a pistol, to protect your family, what do you intend to do with that? Mm-hmm. So you have premeditated murder. When you start talking about guns for self-defense or proactive militants, you have no biblical backing for that. And that's where we get into discussions about lots of things, whether it be the military or whether it be the police force. Or what does a Christian need a gun for? What are you going to do with a gun, Christian? Christian, what do you need a gun for? Well, don't you tell me I can't have a gun? I didn't ask. I said, what do you need one for? Well, because I'm going to protect my family. What scripture tells you to shoot someone? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. That's what I know. See, you put yourself in a position. What if that guy wasn't there to murder you? Or what if he wasn't there to harm you? And, you're putting yourself in a position of taking life. That guy walking in, that crackhead, is made in the image of God. Needs the gospel. But I'm going to shoot him? Who's my neighbor? Isn't the crackhead my neighbor? See, the issue for me, brother, is it's a very emotional issue for people.
Of course it is.
Because we have been raised in America. And
That's
America
right.
says we have guns, and America says we have a Second Amendment. America says, and that's the problem. Brother, I can't stress this enough. We are Christians. We're not Americans.
Well, let's make it obvious. He walks in with a gun of his own.
Yep.
I'm going to kill your family. Let's make his intent.
Well, if he says those words,
yeah,
right?
let's make his intent obvious.
So my Bible says, don't return evil for evil. You might argue it wouldn't be evil.
America can't hear those words.
The Sixth Commandment tells us not to murder. Is it okay for a police officer to take a life?
Well, so from what perspective is that question being asked? Is it okay for a police officer to take a life? Well, one of the things that police officers swear to do is protect and serve, and one of the things that they acknowledge or speak that they may do is take a life. And we know that's part of being a police officer in our system of government. And what I would have you to talk through with them is, are we talking about for a Christian or for a non-Christian? Because for a Christian, to take a life is something that I believe we're not to do. I believe that, that officer that recently killed Michael Brown, he's taken that life, and I don't know if he professes Christianity or not, but boy, his life could be served preaching the gospel instead of carrying a gun to keep down evil. So, it's right in the eyes of the law for the police officer. It's right in that God uses that to keep down chaos. It's right that just like for Pharaoh or for Judas, I mean, there's a plan for everyone's life. I would encourage you to consider that for a Christian to swear themselves into the military or to swear themselves into police duty, knowing they may have to kill someone. I certainly couldn't do that. I certainly couldn't make a split decision, a snap judgment that says, I need to take that man's life now because he's deserving of death. So, I would say, for you, Corey, that would be sinful and not something you ought to do. For you to be a police officer taking a life. And I've said this a number of times. Could a police officer become a Christian? Of course. Could a soldier become a Christian? Of course. Could a Christian become a police officer? I don't see how. Could a Christian become a soldier? I don't see how. Could a soldier or a police officer become a Christian? Of course. Anyone can be saved. Could a Christian become one of those things? I don't see how. I don't see how I can go to Scripture and say, yep, I'm going to become those things as a Christian. Who cares who wins the presidential election in 2016? And I know I take a lot of heat for that, but I will stand by. It's irrelevant. Here's what I know. I know that God knows who's going to be the president of the United States, that has been decreed from before time began, that I am to be involved in the political process, none. That's what my Bible would teach me about the political process. And so I support whoever gets elected when it's November of 16. Mm-hmm. Whoever gets elected November, whatever, 9th, 3rd, 4th, whoever gets elected that night, that's who I support. Mm-hmm. Because my support will be then, that will be the president of the country I live in, and I will submit to that leadership as long as I'm not asked to sin. So my support will be determined after the fact. Mm-hmm. And I won't even cast a vote. Because because many people would say, well, who's got the most Judeo-Christian? And I don't even like when they say Judeo-Christian, but Christian beliefs. It doesn't matter to me. Who cares? I really mean that. I support whoever gets elected in November of 2016.
Yeah, I mean, the Scripture calls us to pray for those in authority. It tells us to submit to those in authority. It doesn't tell us to vote for them.
Well, they didn't even have the system back then. Yeah. Democracy wasn't even a system. And so people would argue, well, yeah, because it wasn't and now it is, we have an obligation to vote out of Romans 13. No, we don't. We don't have kings. But if there was going to be a king, I would have no vote. So whoever the President of the United States is going to be, God has ordained that. He has decreed that. My involvement is not mandated in Scripture, and therefore my support is who gets elected. Who cares who wins the presidential election in 2016? And I know I take a lot of heat for that, but I will stand by. It's irrelevant. Trying to cure any kind of disease is misguided effort.
Pastor, today the question has to deal with the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. Would you care to make some comments on that, and how should a Christian interact with this?
Sure. I think the first thing I would do is talk about what you said there at the end. What to do with the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge seems like a silly question. Who cares? I mean, do what you want. See, I think we do too much of that as Christians. I think we interact with the world around us without much thought. And we just kind of go on autopilot. And I think it's worthy to consider everything we do, worthy considering that through Scripture, through who God is. And so there's two things I would look at with the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. And one is, first let me say that ALS is a brutal disease. I've never known anybody to die from it, but I've seen videos of people that have had it. And I recognize that it's just a very brutal disease and very debilitating and tough to watch someone you love die from. And So I don't want to minimize that in any way. And at the same time, I do want to say this, that ALS is one way to die. And we are all going to die. Ever since sin entered the world, wages of sin is death, so now our physical bodies will all die, and there's many ways that happens. ALS happens to be one of them. And the question is, and so I want to say that I get how devastating that might be for someone. I don't want to be insensitive, and I don't believe I am being, even though you might be hearing that. But it's one way to die, and there's many ways of dying, and the question is, ought we as Christians try to be curing any kind of disease? Our efforts be to raise money to cure diseases, to cure something that you can't cure, death. We're all going to die. Our job as Christians is to spread the gospel. So our time, our energy, and our resources ought to be used towards the spreading of the gospel first and foremost. And so that's not what happens with the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. I'm not much for social media. I'm kind of a dinosaur, but I do enough social media. Then the people I run with are Christians mainly, so the people I follow are lots of Christians or professing Christians, and everybody seems quick to do the Ice Bucket Challenge. Pastors I follow, and youth pastors and the youth ministries, and I wonder, what are you trying to do as a Christian? Aren't we to be spreading the gospel? And that's what our efforts ought to be pointed towards. And so I think trying to cure any kind of disease is misguided effort.